Yeah, perfect. Okay, so hi all. So I'm Seb Hague. My talk's called DFIR, Don't Forget Your Roots. If you thought you were coming to a talk about how to detect sort of Privesk on Linux, well, you've been catfished. It's not about that. So I apologise if that is the case. So what I'm covering today is my sort of first few years of IT experience as a sysadmin, probably a very distinctly average one at best. And how these skills, in essence, help me drove forward into where I am as a digital forensics and incident responder at the minute. The talk will go into the skills I used, from lab building to network redesign, and how that, in essence, helps me in instance on the fly from an end-to-end process, rather than just sticking them some recommendations and leaving the client be. Okay, so the agenda. So what I'm going to cover today is, who am I? Obviously, I know a few of you have met me before. My path, so how I got to where I am today. Any skills gained, and this is in particular skills gained outside of digital forensics. There's skills gained prior I got into this specific field within IT. I'm then going to go through a sort of mock-up scenario, just to give it a bit of context into a pretend incident that we can cover today. And then I'm going to cover how previous skill sets that I've utilised and learned prior to my time within digital forensics has helped me in a various amounts of incidents. And we'll then go on to any questions that you have, and hopefully you'll be nice, and I can get a beer after this. Anyway, so who am I? So I'm currently a DFIR consultant within Trustwave's Spider Labs team. I'm also the Blue Team Level 2 Advanced SIEM author, the Blue Team Level 1 exam developer. I love all things InfoSec and system engineering. And if you do see me in the pub later and did enjoy the talk, I'll take a double spice rum Pepsi Max with a slice of orange, please, if that's okay. Okay, quick disclaimer. So general lawyer stuff. So everything I do say within this is my opinion and my opinion only, and doesn't represent the organisation I work for, which is Trustwave. Okay, so my path. So where I started, what seems like quite a long time ago now, when I was a bit younger. So in 2013, I joined the Royal Air Force as a cyberspace communications specialist, which is a really long word for IT admin, pretty much. A few years after that, I moved over into a senior security analyst. That role was probably quite vague. That involved the system engineering, IDS configuration, SIEM architecture. In essence, it was very much jack of all. I then left the Royal Air Force and joined Vodafone's CERT team, where I enjoyed just less than a year and came where I am now at Trustwave Spider Labs. So the key bit about this are skills gained in my time prior to me coming into digital forensics and incident response. So the key skills that I did gain during that time period were Windows and Unix administration, network configuration and design, lab development and building. And the big bit, I just want to highlight this again and again, problem solving. I find it's something that's quite often lost, in my opinion, with a lot of digital forensics now. You get a problem, you can't run a tool over it. How do you get around that? Coming from a sysadmin background, problem solving is very much your day in, day out job, especially when you're dealing with users. And then I just put other generic sysadmin stuff, so sort of AD configuration, in addition to a variety of others. Okay, so what I'm going to do now, just to give a bit of context, is cover company XYZ. And this is almost like a mock instant that I'm trying to highlight in this brief at the minute. So company XYZ have been affected by a domain-wide compromise. We've seen vast amount of command and control beaconing leaving the network. We found out that they built a flat network, so there's, in essence, no segregation. The layer 3 devices have weak passwords and don't lock out, and unfortunately, all the sysadmins are off work. And they also have insecure REST APIs connecting to a database that contains PII data. So that's a bit of context in this instant that I believe you could come into day to day. I quite often find that flat networks are in place, there's a lot of command and control beaconing, and domain-wide compromise is obviously the end goal for most threat actors nowadays. So, channeling my inner sysadmin, there's a few skills that can help me within this instant. So what I'm going to cover first is the sort of generic overview of handling the incident. So number one is level the playing field. You have to think like an admin. I can guarantee the attackers are always thinking like admins. If anything, they're probably better than the admins quite often. So to keep current, so instead of forgetting your skill sets and not reverting back to them and only focusing on forensics, go back and build systems, build applications, learn about them, learn about the logs they develop. And what that does mean is that when you're in calls with clients or you're in calls with your internal team, you can provide faster recommendations. Instead of having to drop off the call and speak to them 2 hours later, you can provide an instant recommendation, and obviously time is of the essence when you're dealing with incidents. Quite often, when handling an incident, like I said, there's a flat network, and if you come from a background where you have done network admin and understand how to segregate, that's something you do very much on the fly. So it's almost network architecture at speed for a client quite often. And I do say this, it's quite a tough one, because I know a lot of the time, a lot of responders say that, oh, that's a network architect's job. But within large organizations, quite often, architects don't have the time to deal with a sub-organization or a small portion of the network. That's something, as an incident responder, you can deal with on the fly during an incident. And the next one, and where skill sets help me, is forensic collection. So imagine a Windows domain, and you've got, 250 assets that you want to collect data from. And there's no EDR tooling, which is something that you can come across quite often. The last thing you want to do is run a phase 1 collection tool, such as Cape, for instance, on all 250 assets, and then manually upload all of those up to a file server. So instead, you can work with sysadmins, work with the teams, and put together an automated way to do that. Okay, so the next one. So we know that company XYZ have got, in essence, C2 beacons all over the shop. They're consistently used by threat actors. And I found a few years ago, I didn't fully understand C2, the infrastructure, and how it works. I didn't understand what's within the art of the possible when utilizing that, and how easy they are to use. So instead of just not understanding that, I find the best way to understand it is to build it. So you go away, you build a posh C2 server, you build a Cobalt Strike with a genuine license, and then you understand how easy that is to use and how easy a threat actor can dump passwords, latch and remove, set up a proxy. Okay, the next one. And I think this is almost an ongoing task as a forensic investigator that you should be doing all the time. And it's understanding applications. Within large organizations, you quite often come across bespoke and unusual applications, and quite often the foundation is still the same. So instead of just dealing with that at the time, if you have spare time, build applications, look at the logs they develop, look at how they communicate, look at the APIs they utilize. And once you understand that, when you come into an incident, it actually gives you a foundation to understand the incident more and react to it quickly. Next one. So APIs, I've sort of put WTF. I really didn't get these when I first heard about them. They boggled my mind. I know they're used widely. I think they're hard to understand how they're used properly, if, in my opinion, if you haven't utilized them widely or built them. And they're often misconfigured. A lot of instances you see now out in the wide are public-facing IPAs, which threat actors sort of compromise, or they'll find, and then they might be connected into a database somewhere. So what I did to get around that, I had a big incident on, and I can't go into the details of that, but I was very confused as to how it worked. So instead of just sitting there and trying to understand the logs, what I did was I set up a web server, I set up a MySQL database, and I actually configured a REST API service to pull data from the database. And that helped me understand much more how APIs can work and how they can be misconfigured, because mine was very badly misconfigured. And yes, that's in essence the 4 big stages covered for me. So the next bit, and this is like a quote that I'd like to sort of end my brief on. I apologize, it's probably a bit shorter than expected. But in essence, you've got to see it to be it. So what I'm saying there is, instead of just looking at stuff and not understanding it, build it, design it, test it, break it. And as a forensic investigator, that helps you understand that environment much more than sysadmin would. Okay, I apologize, that's probably a bit shorter than expected, but are there any questions?
How much of the scholars get trained on application security? That's the biggest gap I see with it. Did you get trained on the
So the question there was, how often do responders get training on application security? So I personally haven't had much training on application security. Anything I do know about it has been self-taught. I know within Spider Labs, they're the big advocates for learning consistently, and we do have a very good pen test team who we can go to for that. I'm quite new to the team, so I haven't done much of that just yet. But I personally haven't had much training around that. Are there any other questions?
So you mentioned it's really difficult, for example, getting phase inflection scripts, like loads of machine learning. What solutions do you have for this?
So I know within a previous organisation they came up with quite a smart solution. I won't go into the details of that, but in essence, what it did was, if you were to do it with AWS, for instance, they went via proxies and utilised S3 buckets. In essence, just put objects into S3 buckets. Oh, I can. Okay, so within the organisation, how it actually worked is, so there was wide use of Azure blob storage. And across the entire organisation, all the proxies allowed all traffic to, in essence, this organisation's Azure cloud. So the way to get around that deep within the organisation was a very, very good sysadmin, who unfortunately isn't in the room today, put together a PowerShell script. In essence, what I did was just use the HTTP put to place artifacts up into the cloud. And from there, what we did was we actually mounted that storage within virtual machines in Azure. And what that meant for us at the time was, in essence, half the time it took us to analyze instance. Because what we could do, instead of uploading the data to an SFTP server and then downloading it, what we could do is upload it, mount that storage, and begin analysis right away, and then only download the artifacts that are really relevant. So I'm going to be completely honest with you. I actually almost fell into IT security within the Royal Air Force. In essence, so my old boss came to me one day and he said, "Oh, Seb, can you use Linux?" I was like, "Yes." I was like, "Oh, perfect. You're perfect for this job." And it turns out I enjoyed it. It's where I am today. But my first actual exposure within IT security and my first day in work, in essence, gave us a big server stack, a lot of licenses, Firepower, Splunk, and told us to just build a SOC. So I was very much baptized in fire, and that was split between two of us. So what we did was we built a SOC, and I broke a SOC, and then I fixed it and broke it again. And I found the steep learning curve helped me get where I am today. And it's that problem solving. And for instance, during instance, quite often, like the fact I can utilize SIEM, I can speak to clients about their SIEM architecture and network architecture, as well as doing the forensics is invaluable in my opinion. Yeah. So I think it's all dependent on how you learn. Like I personally learn by doing. So I'm a big advocate for, so a friend of mine, Josh Beeman, runs Blue Team Labs online. And that platform, in my opinion, is basically the hack the box for blue teaming, and it's gamified. So that's potentially the first place I'd go. I know Immersive Labs. I personally just learn by doing. And I think a lot of instant response is communications. And in my opinion, if you're good with people and, I mean, you update a client, like, you're doing that right. So the rest of it is getting the technical facts back to the client as fast as possible. So gamify it, I guess, is the answer. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much.